Could you impersonate a president? Or what about a king? Let's travel to 14th century England. Imagine we're at the gates of Oxford University, and all of a sudden this guy just comes out of nowhere. He begins talking nonsense and starts to cause a commotion. Eventually, some people inside the university start to hear him. They listen. I'm the king, blah, blah, blah. This guy's name was John, and he was mocking the king. And so the people inside the university hearing are shocked. So they run up to the gate to see John. And that's when they're like, yo, bro, you know that's offensive, right? You can't be dissing the king like that. And that's when John is like, no, bro, I am the king. And so they give him a crazy side eye. They look him up and down. The way John acted and dressed resembled more of a peasant than a king. But one of them was like, yo, bro, why does he low-key look like the king, though? And you see, this guy was right. John was tall, good-looking, and had long hair just like the king. And so that's when John's like, just hear me out. I'm a victim of the baby swap. And they're like, what's the baby swap? And so that's when John explains that when he was a baby, one of the servants that was supposed to be taking care of him accidentally let his ear get bit off by a pig. And so obviously the servant is scared as balls. I mean, this is the 14th century. They had some crazy punishments back in the day. And she just let the king's son get his ear bitten off. So she comes up with a plan to swap John with the peasant baby, giving John back to the peasant family and giving the peasant baby back to the royal family, who then grew up to be the king of this time. And so as John's talking, one of them wasn't feeling the story. He's like, y'all not really gonna believe this peasant, right? And that's when John lifts up his hair and boom, he has no ear. And that's when they're all like, oh shit, he gotta be telling the truth. And to top it all off, John's like, and I'll even take the king in combat for the throne. And that's when the people were like, all right, he's putting his life on the line. He doesn't have an ear. There's no way this could be kept. So they go around and start to spread the word. And things were actually starting to look good for John. You may be asking, how could this be good? Listen up. It's important to mention that the king of this time, Edward II, wasn't all that liked by his subjects. You see, he was losing battles and the people weren't messing with that. Something else to mention is that Edward II wasn't exactly your normal king. You see, he was known to enjoy activities like digging ditches and farming, which weren't normal because he was royalty and those were poor people activities. And as word started to spread around, eventually the royals caught wind, and so they let the king know what's up. And when the king hears this, he's like, all right, we got to get this dude to pull up, see if he's really about that life. So eventually they arrest John and bring him to Northampton. That's when the guards bring John out to the throne. And so John comes out and the king sees him. And the king's like, this guy don't even look like me for real. But instead of getting mad, he thinks it's funny. The king starts to consider that, hey, maybe this John guy would make a good jester. And so as the king's thinking, he looks over to his wife. And she is not having it at all. Historians speculate that maybe she saw John as a threat to the throne. And so she's all like, you really gonna let this fool play you like that? So the king starts to think about it more. He's like, yo, this dude is low-key ugly. And he's been out here calling me twin. I can't have that. John's in the back talking about, and I'll fight you for that crown too. And so the king's like, nah, I'm not having this. Be gone of him. And so they throw John in prison and they charge him with sedition, which is basically just verbally rebelling against the king. And so fast forward to prison, I like to imagine John was probably tweaking. Maybe he was the rightful heir, or maybe he wasn't. But regardless of that, the trial was coming up and he was in the 14th century. You know how much they love hanging people back then? Let's just say John prefers his neck unstrangled. So the trial comes up. Imagine we're in a 14th century royal court. John's over here on the podium scratching his neck looking like a tweaker, but he pulls himself together, and that's when he tells everybody, all right, y'all heard me once, now y'all gotta hear me out again. Some people in the back of the court were like, are we really gonna listen to this dude yap again? But the judge is like, nah, I'm trying to hear this. And so that's when John is like, hey, my cat did it. They're like, what you mean the cat did it? John's like, no, for real, my cat did it. That's the devil in disguise. The judge starts shaking his head, but John continues. He's like, that cat is really just the devil in disguise, and one day he convinced me that pretending to be the king was a good idea. So the judge just looks at John. He's like, you know what? You might be onto something. John's like, really? The judge is like, nah. John's like, bro, you really had me there. The judge is like, I know. We're still gonna have to hang you though. John's like, for real? Judge is like, yeah, for real. And then the judge looks to his judge friend. His friend is like, hey, bro, you heard about them witches recently? The judge is like, you know what? I have heard about them witches. Let's kill the cat just to be safe. And so both John and his cat were hung together. John's body was burned after. Moral of the story? Be yourself, guys.